From Pacifica, this is a Democracy Now! Special, live from the Supreme Court in Washington, D.C., from New York and around the country. We are moments away from learning whether the court will overturn President Obama's landmark health care law in part, in full, or not at all. We'll speak with filmmaker Michael Moore, with attorney David Cole, with assurance industry whistleblower Wendell Potter, Dr. Margaret Flowers of Physicians for a National Health Program, Elizabeth Benjamin of the Community Service Society of New York, and others. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, this Supreme Court special. I'm Amy Goodman. Yes, the Supreme Court is moments away from issuing its decision on the constitutionality of the Affordable Care Act, the landmark health care reform bill signed by President Obama 2 years ago. The case heavily focuses on the so-called individual mandate, which requires most people buy health insurance by 2014 or pay a tax penalty. The court will decide whether to strike down the mandate and determine whether the rest of the law can stand. Coming on the last day of the Supreme Court's term, the ruling will have major implications, not just for the nation's health care system, but also the 2012 election race and beyond. Republican presidential candidate Mitt Romney has called for the law's repeal despite its similarities to the mandate-based health care measure he oversaw as Massachusetts governor. Progressive legislators are launching a campaign today to push for single-payer legislation if the court strikes down the law. 75 members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus have signed onto a bill by Congressmember John Conyers to create a single-payer, publicly financed, privately delivered universal health care program. Single-payer activists are gathering on the steps of the Capitol as well, calling for Medicare for all. In a moment, we are going to the Supreme Court. We are joined by Georgetown law professor David Cole, legal correspondent for The Nation in Vermont. But I just want to get a sense of the scene of outside the Supreme Court. Let's turn right now to Democracy Now!'s Renee Feltz. Renee, can you describe what you're seeing around you outside the Supreme Court?
I certainly can, Amy. We are, as you said, minutes away, really seconds possibly, but really minutes away. And the nation is waiting with bated breath to see what the Supreme Court justices are going to decide about Obama's keynote legislation of his administration, his health care reform bill. Outside the Supreme Court on the steps, it's quite a crazy scene. We are seeing hundreds and hundreds of protesters. They're all kind of gaggled together. But what we do see when you start to parse the mix are you see students who are here who have said that they've come all the way from places like Louisiana, afraid of losing their health care under their parents' health insurance. I've seen many nurses with the organization National Nurses United, and as you know, they're health practitioners, and they say that one of the reasons they're here and that they hope that the Supreme Court upholds parts of this bill is because they see patients coming in to their emergency rooms who have waited to the last minute to get treatment because they don't have health care. I also met an artist here who tried to profile people who had different problems with their health insurance and lack of health care, and was in that process moved to become an activist, and she's out here today protesting. Many of the organizations you speak with are not really taking a stand one way or the other on what some would call Obamacare. They're sort of parsing out some things they like about it, some things they don't, so you get some mixed messages on that. I should note that there is also a sizable contingent of pro-life protesters here, as they call themselves, who are wrapping into this whole discussion the issue of abortion. So it's a highly politicized debate here at the nation's capital, surprise, surprise, and it's taking place on the steps of the Supreme Court. Amy, when we come back, we'll have Dr. Margaret Flowers of Physicians for National Health Care joining us, but that's the scene here at the Supreme Court.
Renee, thanks so much. I want to go up to Vermont, which has progressive health care legislation in the state. David Cole is there. He's law professor at Georgetown University Law Center and legal affairs correspondent for The Nation magazine. He's in Charlotte, Vermont. David, thanks so much for being with us. Why don't you lay out what's at stake today? Talk about the Affordable Care Act, the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act that the Supreme Court is minutes away from issuing a ruling on.
Well, it's a piece of legislation that seeks to ensure that everybody can get health care in the United States, and it does so by guaranteeing that people can buy health care and can't be discriminated against based on pre-existing conditions. But then it also says that those people who can afford to buy health care insurance must buy health care insurance or pay a tax if they choose not to. The reason for that is that if you ensure that people can get health care without discrimination based on pre-existing conditions, there's an incentive for people to become freeloaders or free riders and wait until they get sick and only then buy insurance. So the scheme says we're going to make sure everybody can get health care, but then we're going to also make sure that people can't be free riders by waiting until they get sick to purchase the health care. And the principal question before the court is whether that requirement that people who can afford to buy health care must buy health insurance is constitutional under the Commerce Clause, which gives Congress the power to regulate interstate commerce, or the Necessary and Proper Clause, which gives Congress the power to enact laws that are necessary and proper or related to their affirmative powers to regulate commerce.
We're going also to the Supreme Court just outside where Margaret Flowers is standing by among many single-payer activists. She's a pediatrician. She's president of Physicians for a National Health Program. She was arrested in a very raucous Baucus caucus. What I mean by that is it was Senator Max Baucus of Montana who, as the legislation was being considered, when the panels were being held and no single-payer representative was there, she stood up in that hearing room, and she was taken out by security. Dr. Margaret Flowers, you're on the steps of the Supreme Court today. As David Cole describes what the legislation is, and as the decision is just about to be handed down, where do you come down?
Well, it's so interesting to hear David Cole using these progressive talking points defending the law, because too much of what's going on here is about politics and not about health policy. I was with a group of physicians and lawyers who filed an amicus brief to the Supreme Court asking them to find the individual mandate unconstitutional. We do not believe that it's right to force people to purchase a private product, especially when that product is defective. When people have private insurance, they still can't afford to get health care, and they still go bankrupt when they have a serious accident or illness. Private insurance is the problem. We don't want to further privatize our health care. The simplest way to address our health care crisis is through Medicare for all.
And what about the decision? If they strike down, for example, the individual mandate, do you consider that a victory, or do you consider that a problem for health care in this country?
Yeah, we would like to see the individual mandate struck down. It's not constitutional. We're spending $440 of our taxpayer dollars to give them directly to a private industry. It's a corporate welfare on steroids. This bill does help people, and we don't oppose expanding Medicaid. We don't oppose trying to regulate insurance. We don't think that's going to work. We know that those are not solutions. We believe that every person in this country should have health care. Why are we debating these little tiny things? Who gets a little bit more? Who doesn't get a little bit more? The conversation we should be having is about what works and what doesn't work. We're already spending twice as much as the other industrialized nations per person per year on health care. We are paying for lifelong, high-quality, comprehensive health care. We're not getting it, and we're not going to get it until we go to a Medicare for all. That's the simplest solution.
We are just getting word from the SCOTUS blog, that's the Supreme Court blog, that the individual mandate has survived as a tax. The individual mandate has survived as a tax. Elizabeth Benjamin is vice president of the Community Service Society in New York, one of the leading healthcare advocates in this country, awarded the Families USA Consumer Health Advocate of the Year award. What about this news? What does it mean?
It's incredible. It means that, 30 million Americans will gain coverage come 2014. Sorry, it's something I've been fighting for all my life, so it's quite
now,
something.
I should say that CNN, as opposed to SCOTUS blog, is saying exactly the opposite.
Oh, no.
So we're gonna just keep on reporting to you what others are reporting until we actually get the news.
So if the law were upheld, which we don't really seem to know yet one way or the other, it will mean that 30 million people that have no health insurance right now will get coverage. But as importantly, for those of us who do have health insurance and honestly, I defy anyone right now to go out and say, oh, I don't want health insurance. I'm going to hope that we get Medicare for all. I mean, in the meantime, we have to actually deal with the system and the reality we have. You know, as much as we may not prefer that reality, that's the reality many of us have. We get right now in America, hundreds of millions of people get health insurance through their jobs. So those of us who have health insurance through our jobs will now benefit from incredible, or right now already benefiting from incredible protections. We have the right to appeal. We didn't used to have the right to appeal. We have free preventive care. We didn't used to have the right to free preventive care. The insurance industry used to be able to say you have a lifetime cap on your insurance coverage. So if you needed a transplant, you wouldn't be able to get it because you had hit your lifetime cap or your annual benefit cap. So all of those things mean a lot to everyday Americans.
I want to just report, as you're speaking, Elizabeth Benjamin, again, SCOTUS blog is saying the mandate is constitutional. Chief Justice Roberts joins the left of the court. This is what's coming from SCOTUS blog as we speak. But, Elizabeth Benjamin, isn't it true that tens of millions still are not covered?
Right now, yes, it's true, because the health reform hasn't actually been implemented yet. And at some point, I think we should talk about what's it all mean and how it works, because I think there's still a lot of confusion about it. But even after the Affordable Care Act is...
I'm going to interrupt one more time.
Sure.
SCOTUS blog will be continuing to update people as the information trickles out of the court. The Medicaid provision is limited but not invalidated. Elizabeth.
Medicaid or mandate?
It says the Medicaid provision
which should I talk about?
is limited. Talk about the mandate.
Medicaid. That is really tricky. I think it was a big surprise for most legal observers that the court took the Medicaid provision. What the Medicaid provision does is expand Medicaid. In New York, some progressive states had already done so, quite a few. Actually, had already expanded public coverage for many of their families, and many states had not. So many states had Medicaid only up to 25% of the poverty line, which is something like $3,000, $5,000 a year. That was almost impossible for most people to get onto coverage in many, many states. Now, what this means is that there will be a federal baseline for Medicaid coverage, 138% of poverty, which is around $15,000 a year. It's not a lot of money, but people who are very poor would have some guaranteed level of coverage. That means coverage for 16 million Americans come 2014. What was before the court was whether the federal government had the power to essentially say, look, we'll underwrite this. We'll pay for 90% of the cost of expanding Medicaid in your states, but you have to come up with 10%, and that's what many states objected to. They perceive that as being bribery, but we do not, because we know it means for real what it means to the real lives of real people.
David Cole, Dr. Margaret Flower is saying you're using progressive language to talk about legislation that looks like, at least at this part, SCOTUS blog is saying the bottom line, the entire ACA, the entire Affordable Care Act is upheld, with the exception that the federal government's power to terminate states' Medicaid funds is narrowly read. David Cole, put that in English and then respond to Margaret Flower's criticism.
Well, in English, it means that the bulk of this law will be in effect, and we have the best we could get from the Congress that we had when we were seeking to get universal health care coverage. And Ms. Flowers is correct. It's not a single-payer system, and a single-payer system many people think would be better. But, of course, that was politically unrealistic. And what the Obama administration was able to get was this scheme, which uses the market, but also uses regulation to ensure that everybody can get on, to expand coverage for the poor, and to require those who can afford health insurance to either buy that health insurance and not be a free rider, or pay a tax. And it sounds like, from the reports from SCOTUS blog, that the Supreme Court upheld that provision, that individual mandate provision, on the ground that it is a tax. Essentially, it is saying to people, you either do something, buy health insurance, or you pay a tax. And that was one of the arguments that was put forward by the Obama administration in the court as to why the law was constitutional.
It's so interesting. SCOTUS blog is saying that largely the bottom line is the entire Affordable Care Act is upheld, and CNN is still reporting what seems the opposite. Justice's ruling overturns requirement that Americans must buy health insurance. We're joined from right outside the Supreme Court right now by Karen Higgins from National Nurses. But Margaret Flowers is still there as well. Margaret Flowers, the news that we are bringing you, it is contradictory, but SCOTUS blog is insisting that the ACA has been upheld, even as CNN says that the mandate has been struck down. Right. Now CNN is reversing what they're saying.
We called this earlier in the week that if the Supreme Court justices sided with the corporations, as they have been doing, they would find the entire law constitutional, because this law is a corporate bailout for the private industries that are profiting off of our current situation. And the talking points that you're hearing are coming from people that are supporting, they're partisan supporters of this law. Healthcare for America Now is the group that Elizabeth's group belongs to. They're a front group for the Democratic Party. We've got to stop making this political. We've got to start talking about the truth. Maybe you're expanding some coverage to more people. What kind of coverage are they getting? They're getting Medicaid. That's very poor coverage. They're getting private insurance that's skimpy, that will still leave them bankrupt when they have a serious illness. When we accept working within the framework that is handed to us, we will not get to where we need to be. We must demand that Congress and the White House drop 2 words from the current Medicare Act, expand Medicare to every person in this country, and then improve that. Until we do that, we're not going to have a universal, high-quality health care system in this country. This has got to be about policy.
Dr. Margaret Flowers,
I'm so disappointed to hear them.
Dr. Margaret Flowers, when you say drop 2 words, those 2 words over 65?
Right. Yeah, drop them. Expand Medicare to every person in this country immediately. Then we will have a universal health care system that's publicly financed, that's about health. Right now, what we've done is we've further privatized our health care system. We've gone in the wrong direction. And if this was passed by Romney, you would have had the same people sitting there opposing it. This is the Romney bill passed by Obama. We've got to stop making this about politics. It's got to be about what's best for the American people. We have to demand health care for every person in this country, not just a few more.
Dr. Flowers, just before you go, what is your plan right now? You have Justice Roberts voting to save the ACA. He joins the more progressive elements of the church, of the Supreme Court, and they have upheld this. So what is Physicians for a National Health Program going to do right now?
We're going to do what we do every single day. We're going to continue to educate and push for a national Medicare for all. We're going to continue to advocate on behalf of every person and demand what every other industrialized nation has, a universal health care system. We won't stop until we achieve that.
Elizabeth Benjamin of Community Service Society. Margaret Flowers saying your group is part of a coalition that's just there to support the Democratic Party.
Well, we're a nonpartisan institution. Community Service Society clearly is not supportive of the Democratic Party. So I don't want to make this personal. It's not personal. It's personal to the lives of everyday Americans. The Community Service Society runs a consumer assistance program. We've helped 73,000 New Yorkers under the Affordable Care Act in the last 18 months. Those people need health coverage. They don't want to wait for the day that we can get Medicare for all, although we would all love to have Medicare for all, I'm sure. Right now, we have the reality we're dealt with, and that's it. Real people need health coverage. Real people need to be able to deal with their medical bills. 63% of all Americans who are in bankruptcy are there because of medical costs.
Let me go to David Cole for a moment. As SCOTUS blog says, this is the blog on the Supreme Court, calls the money quote. Chief Justice's vote saving the ACA, saying, our precedent demonstrates Congress had the power to impose the exaction in Section 5000A under the taxing power, and that Section 5000A need not be read to do more than impose a tax. This is sufficient to sustain it. What that means?
Well, the law on the taxing power has long been that Congress can enact a tax for any purpose that it deems to further the general welfare. So unlike its regulatory powers, Congress's powers to order that people do X, Y, and Z on pain of going to prison or the like. There, Congress has to point to a specifically granted power in the Constitution. And so many people were saying, well, the power to regulate insurance purchase is the commerce power. But this argument, which the court accepted, is different. It says, because the only consequence of not purchasing health care insurance is you pay a tax, then this is actually an exercise of the taxing power. And the taxing power is unlimited in terms of substance. As long as it comes in the form of a tax, as long as the penalty for not doing something the federal government tells you to do is to pay a tax, there's no restriction on what Congress can do. And so the court upholds the mandate as an exercise of the taxing power.
Karen Higgins is standing outside the Supreme Court right now. She's a nurse and co-president of National Nurses United. Overall, it looks like the Supreme Court, with the support of Chief Justice Roberts, has decided to uphold the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, President Obama's law. Your response, Karen Higgins?
Well, I think that what I think this hopefully does is open the debate once again about clearly where are we going with health care. This bill is not health care. This bill is basically health insurance. It does not cover everybody in this country. There are millions of people that still do not have health insurance. It isn't, to us, going to make a difference. Some people, you can mandate them to be insured, but if they can't afford it, if the discussion is, if I need to feed my children and put a roof over my head, you know what, I'm not going to have insurance if those are going to be my priorities in an economy right now that is just devastating. So what we hope is that this will open the door for us to really talk about, as we, a true Medicare for all system. We do this for our elderly. We take care of them when they're over 65. We've had this program for over 40 years. It's very cost containing. It actually runs well. We think this needs to be expanded out for everyone in this country. The only ones that are making out, unfortunately, on this bill are insurance companies and drug companies. We still are going to see more and more people that I see coming into ERs that end up in ICUs where I work because why? They couldn't afford medications. They couldn't go to a doctor because they couldn't afford it. And these are people that have health care. When you look at it between co-pays, deductibles, these are a large chunk of change to some people who are struggling every day to make ends meet. So in opt of not going to a doctor because you can't afford those costs, you end up in an ICU. This is not acceptable in this country. So you know what, this happened, but what we really hope will come out of this is that we will now truthfully have a very strong debate on what is really health care in this country and what is health insurance and what is the best thing for the people in this country, and that would be true health care.
Elizabeth Benjamin.
Well, I was just going to say that one of the interesting things under the law is that states can experiment, and so those states like Vermont that want to move forward with a single payer system will be able to do so, and we completely support the states' rights to move forward in single payer, and we expect many will. But in the meantime, many millions of Americans and consumer health advocates are trying to work with the system that we have. Most Americans get job-based coverage. That's what they're comfortable with, and that's what this court has upheld, and we're going to move forward and make that system better. I think the most important thing, though, is for low-income Americans. 30 million low-income Americans will be able to get free quality health coverage, and we're really excited about that. And, of course, moderate-income Americans will be able to get tax subsidies that will defray the cost of having coverage.
What are the other special programs? For example, kids on their parents' health insurance.
Okay, yes. One of the things that's been most popular is 3 million young adults that have come home. We have a real boomerang generation happening right now. There aren't a lot of jobs for young people that have good, high-quality health care benefits, and a lot of those kids have come back to their parents' homes or just come back and started working jobs that don't have benefits. They've been able to be added. 3 million of these folks have been able to be added to their parents' coverage, and that has really made a difference in everyday life. We helped one woman named Megan Schley, who lives in Circleville, New York, and she came home from college last year. She was feeling really sick. She was, of course, uninsured as she started getting a job. She went home. She was feeling very sick. Her parents got tested. They thought she had cancer. They racked up $10,000 in bills. Turns out she had Crohn's disease. We were able to get her on this pre-existing health insurance plan, which is a plan that's been set up, that's a sort of a bridge to 2014 in every single state, along with 70,000 other Americans. She was able to get into this health care plan. It covered all the costs of her new Crohn's medication. And then on top of that, she was able to, in January, go on her parents' coverage for free. And that's made, a profound difference for Megan's life. And that's what is happening over and over again. We see it on our Community Health Advocates program, where we help individual New Yorkers. We have people come to us with cancer. They go to a place like Memorial Sloan Kettering. They're told that they have to pay $65,000 up front or they can't go in the door. We can get them coverage. Suddenly they can get care. It means a lot to real people, and it's an extraordinary moment for us all.
But the idea that this will set back the move for Medicare for all.
Well, it hasn't set it back in Vermont at all. And so I think the point is that in those states where the people of those states are ready to go forward, we can get Medicare for all. And I think the problem is that in many places people aren't quite ready for Medicare for all. Though I personally may be, I think not every American is. And, we live in a democratic society. This is what we could get with our Congress and with our current president. And it's an incredible leap forward. Just think of it. 30 million Americans will be able to access quality, affordable coverage come 2014 through these health insurance exchanges, which I like to think are kind of like these Costco's in the sky, where people can take advantage of bulk purchasing. Prices will go down in New York State as much as 66%. For small businesses, they will finally have an easy way to get health coverage. They'll be able to do apples-to-apples comparison and buy health insurance at an affordable rate and get incredible tax subsidies to do so.
This is a key comment on salvaging the Medicaid expansion. This is from Chief Justice Roberts. He says, nothing in our opinion precludes Congress from offering funds under the ACA, that's the Affordable Care Act, to expand the availability of health care and requiring that states accepting such funds comply with the conditions on their use. What Congress is not free to do is to penalize states that choose not to participate in that new program by taking away their existing Medicaid funding. That critical detail, you can't take away the existing Medicaid funds. We're joined on the phone right now by Wendell Potter, a well-known insurance industry whistleblower, senior analyst on healthcare at the Center for Public Integrity, former executive at Cigna and Humana, author of Deadly Spin, an insurance company insider, speaks out on how corporate PR is killing healthcare and deceiving Americans. Wendell Potter, you too are in Vermont right now, which is a state that is pushing for Medicare for all. What about the Supreme Court decision? Justice Roberts siding with the four more progressive members of the court to largely uphold the ACA.
I think it's a very good thing, and certainly it will indeed have a profound effect on many Americans, almost every one of us, and already has for many people. And even for Vermonters, I will be speaking to healthcare reform advocates here, those who are working for single payer in Vermont. The Affordable Care Act actually provides funding that will enable the state to go forward. Vermont's a small state. To be able to do this without any support from the federal government would be a challenge. Now, the state has to wait until 2017 without waivers to fully implement single payer, but I think this is a victory all around for consumers, including those here in Vermont.
Joining us in Washington, D.C., right outside the Supreme Court, is Hillary Shelton with the NAACP in Washington, D.C. Hillary Shelton, your response to the court largely upholding the Affordable Care Act. There are a number of single-payer advocates there who are deeply concerned that this means the continuation of private insurance for some and no insurance for many.
Well, it continues to expand what we knew we needed to address when we passed the Affordable Care Act in the first place. And that is, we knew at that time we had about 47 million Americans without health care insurance or health care coverage. Because of that, individuals, families, and even the hospitals themselves were negatively affected by that particular predicament. This bill, if fully implemented, will add 32 million more Americans to the health care rolls. Now, we agree that we haven't completed the issue of covering all Americans, but it's a major step forward. We have to make sure we can do everything in our power to make sure it's fully implemented so those 32 million, over 30% of which are African American, actually have health care insurance coverage.
And Hillary Shelton, where does the NAACP go from here in terms of advocacy? Progressive legislators talking about launching a single-payer initiative. Of course, many activists are saying this, that the legislation is there. Just drop the words over 65 from Medicare for all.
We very much support the need to cover the rest of Americans that are not yet covered even by this law. This law has to be fully implemented, which means appropriations and other issues have to fall in line. But as we look at those Americans that are still yet to be covered by health care insurance, we must continue to push in that direction. And yes, certainly, single payer must be on the table as we have these discussions to cover all Americans and provide health care insurance for all.
David Cole still on the line with us from Vermont. Looking at SCOTUS blog, which is giving us so much of the accurate information that's coming out of the court right now. Justice Ginsburg would uphold Medicaid just as Congress wrote it. That, too, is not controlling. Going on to say, in opening his statement in dissent, Anthony Kennedy says, in our view, the entire act before us is invalid in its entirety. David Cole.
Well, that's quite remarkable. I mean, I think two things are remarkable here. One is that everybody thought that Kennedy was the decisive vote here, that that if he went with the liberals, it would be upheld. If he went with the conservatives, it would be struck down. And in fact, he went with the conservatives, and Chief Justice Roberts turned out to be the one who broke from the conservatives and went with the court on with the liberals to uphold the law. The second thing that's remarkable, at least from that opening line of Justice Kennedy's, is that the conservative justices, joined by Kennedy in this instance, would have not only invalidated the individual mandate, they would have struck down the entire statute because one particular provision they concluded was unconstitutional. That's a really remarkable position, and would have, really put us way back beyond square one in terms of starting over.
And the idea that this continues private insurance, it sort of will stop the momentum for saying clearly the whole system is broken.
Well, yes. I mean, but you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I mean, this is a law, as Hillary Shelton underscored, that is going to have the effect of expanding health care insurance to millions and millions of Americans who did not have it before. It's also a law that ensures that people with pre-existing conditions can't be denied coverage, can't be discriminated against, can't be charged higher rates. It does a lot of good. And yes, it's not the perfect law, it's not the best law, but of course that wasn't the question before the court. The question before the court was, does Congress have the power to step in and deal with a problem of national breadth by enacting a broad-based law that regulates the insurance industry and requires people who can afford to do so to buy into the system rather than be free riders. And thanks to Chief Justice Roberts and the four moderate to liberal justices, we will be able to live with that law. Now, if it doesn't work as best as it should, then of course there'll be room for reform in the future. But I think those who think that it would have been good if it were struck down because somehow that would get us to single payer are just living in some alternative universe.
Wendell Potter, you worked for the insurance industry, and we've got all sorts of reports. They've been pretty quiet because they're doing very well. With a mandate, they make a lot of money. But we did hear, even with that behind the scenes, they were working to subvert this legislation. You were a top exec with two major insurance companies, spokesperson for Aetna and Humana. They've come out pretty well here, don't they?
Pretty well. They don't like the mandate's penalty. In other words, they think that it's the law doesn't penalize people enough for not buying coverage, and so they're not of one mind within the industry. Now, they were concerned that the mandate would be struck and the other parts of the law go forward. That was their worst nightmare. But I want to point out and reiterate what some of the others have been saying too. This is not a setback for the single payer movement either, and I think the insurance industry realizes that. They're going to be under the gun to make sure that they are better able to provide coverage to Americans, or the single payer movement will indeed get much stronger, and I think it will. The other thing is that not all single payer people or advocates are believing this is a setback by any means. I travel and talk to a lot of healthcare advocates, including single payer advocates, and I know that many of them see this as I do, as the end of the beginning of reform, something that we can build on and must build on. This brings millions of people into coverage that we need to do, and I think single-payer people really support that notion that we need to do all we can to bring more people into coverage because it saves lives.
Elizabeth Benjamin, in terms of the issue of saving lives, overall, Medicare for All, if you could explain it, what it would mean and the difference between that and what we have preserved right now.
Sure. The Medicare system is a system where the government reimburses providers essentially directly. Although some people use Medicare through managed care plans, the vast majority of Americans who are seniors or have disabilities, long-term disabilities, use the Medicare system to pay for their care. That is just a direct, government to provider payment, essentially. What this does is it puts insurance companies in the middle, and it's building off the current system of employer-sponsored insurance coverage or job-based insurance coverage. And what it does is it says that people who don't have Medicare would go to in their local states if they didn't get job-based coverage, and your employer will now have to automatically, if you're in a large employer, they would have to automatically enroll you in health insurance. If you're in a small employer, they have no requirement to offer you coverage, but they get up to 50% tax subsidies if they do so. So there's an incredible incentive for small businesses to now offer you health insurance coverage, and in fact, to facilitate small businesses to offer their employees coverage, they will be setting up these little Costco's, these health insurance exchanges or marketplaces where the small businesses can go do an apples-to-apples comparison and quickly buy and efficiently buy health insurance coverage. The other thing it does is that it also offers these exchanges or marketplaces for individuals who don't have coverage with tax subsidies or incredible subsidies, a kind of ladder of subsidies as you go up the income scale to buy health insurance because insurance is so expensive. Finally, the third leg of the stool is that it expands Medicaid, the program that's different from Medicare. Medicare's for seniors and people with disabilities. Medicaid's the program for folks who are very low income, and that's essentially free coverage for very low income people. So what this law does is build off the existing system, trying to make it a little better. It also will generate, I think, $143 billion in deficit savings over 10 years. And what it does, and then the final, I guess, another sort of component of it, and there are many, many elements. It's a pretty complicated law, but another element of it is that it really starts to regulate the insurance industry. I think many of your prior speakers have put up a lot of, legitimate concerns that the current private industry isn't as regulated as it should be. And I think the Obama administration has taken those concerns very much to heart, and I know the state insurance commissioners, many have also taken those concerns to heart. And the Obama administration is starting to order insurance rebates of about $1 billion to 12 million Americans starting this year. And we will see more and more insurance regulation to really correct the bad actors in the market.
I want to talk about racial disparities in health care, but I just want to read a summary from Amy Howe at SCOTUS blog, who says the Affordable Care Act, including its individual mandate that virtually all Americans buy health insurance, is constitutional. constitutional. There were not 5 votes to uphold it on the ground that Congress could use its power to regulate commerce between the states to require everyone to buy health insurance. However, 5 justices agreed that the penalty that someone must pay if he refuses to buy insurance is a kind of tax that Congress can impose using its taxing power. That is all that matters, because the mandate survives. The court did not need to decide whether other parts of the statute were constitutional, except for a provision that required states to comply with new eligibility requirements for Medicaid or risk losing their funding. On that question, the court held that the provision is constitutional as long as states would only lose new funds if they didn't comply with the new requirements rather than all of their funding. Again, that from Amy Howe of SCOTUS blog. Hillary Shelton still with us in Washington, D.C., outside of the Supreme Court. He is the NAACP Washington Bureau Director and Senior Vice President for Advocacy. Hillary, can you talk? Actually, I've just been told that it's Russell McIver that is now with us, editor of Washington, D.C.-based Corporate Crime Reporter, also founder of SinglePayerAction.org. Your thoughts today on the Supreme Court, the Chief Justice Roberts siding with 4 other members of the court saying that the Affordable Care Act is constitutional, including the individual mandate.
Good morning, Amy. Well, we know Single Payer Action, It's Our Economy, and 50 medical doctors filed an amicus brief with the court asking them to strike down the Obama mandate. We thought that it was unconstitutional to force people like myself to buy lousy health insurance from major corporations. Instead, we want to get rid of the insurance corporations, and this is constitutional, get rid of the insurance corporations and replace them all with one single payer, like Taiwan, like Canada, like the UK. This would, no longer would we have 120 Americans dying every day from lack of health insurance. We would control costs. We would have a system that most major Western industrialized countries have. But instead, the Supreme Court decided to side with the corporations and with the corporate parties, the corporate Democrats and the corporate Republicans. We reject Obama. We reject Obamacare. We reject Romney. We reject Romneycare, and we're with the American people for single payer, for Medicare for all, and we haven't figured out, I don't think anyone has really figured out how to bust up this 2-party corporate duopoly. But it's not going to, Obama might be celebrating today, the Democrats might be celebrating, and we got into fights with the corporate Democrats in front of the Supreme Court today. They accused us of taking money from the Republicans and all this because we're calling for the mandate to be struck down as because the mandate protects the insurance industry. But this was a bold, courageous move, 50 medical doctors calling on the court to strike down the Obama mandate and then let us all move to get rid of the insurance companies. But this fundamentally, Amy, is not a legal issue. This is a political issue. And what the court is telling us today is we have to figure out how to organize to move this Congress to do the right thing, to do what the American people want, to do what all the majority of doctors and nurses want, and that's get rid of the insurance companies and have one single Medicare for all payer.
Russell, what about this point that David Cole made about the perfect being the enemy of the good? The idea, I mean, he's speaking to us from Vermont, where they have passed health care for all. The idea that you work toward that, but still cover tens of millions of people more. Russell McIver.
Well, Vermont is not single payer, and in fact, what would happen under Obama, it wouldn't cover 23 million people, even when it was fully implemented. And people are going to suffer for probably 5 to 10 more years until the suffering becomes unbearable. And then we're going to have to come to the conclusion that the rest of the industrialized world has come to, and that is get rid of the insurance companies, have one single payer. Obama is not I don't know if you heard, Amy, about the Harvard law professor who taught Obama 2 courses on law, Roberto Berto Unger, saying that Obama must be defeated. And the reason he said that was because because Obama pretends to be a progressive and he's not, that he puts out the idea that this is a progressive law and it's not. It just protects his corporate funders. And so the Supreme Court today protected Obama's corporate funders also.
Russell McIver, standing right next to you is a Congress member from Minneapolis, is Congressmember Keith Ellison, one of the members of the largest caucus in the House, I believe, and that is the Progressive Caucus. And one of the issues that has been raised over the last few days is that the members of the Progressive Caucus will launch a single-payer initiative. Congressmember Ellison also happens to be the first Muslim member of Congress. Congressman Ellison, welcome to the Democracy Now! Special broadcast. As you speak outside the Supreme Court and hear that Chief Justice Roberts joined with 4 other members of the court to uphold the Affordable Care Act, what is your response?
Well, my response is that I think it's better that it was upheld than it was struck down. But I also long for the day when we got Medicare for all. But the fact is that change doesn't happen in one fell swoop. It usually happens in gradations. And I think that the Affordable Care Act, as much as I think it can fairly be questioned, was a giant leap over what we had before. 32 million more people are going to get health care. And there are a number of other provisions that are going to benefit people. But the progressive movement, I think I just lost something. I hear a dial tone.
We hear you fine, Congressmember Ellison. We hear you fine.
No, I hear like a phone just hung up.
You are fine, Congressman Ellison. We hear you.
Call back.
We hear you. Keep talking. If the camera person, if our producers can tell Congressmember Ellison to just keep on talking, that would be great. By the way, in a moment, we're going to be going to Michael Moore responding to this. David Cole in Vermont, the point that Vermont does not have universal health care.
Well, I'm vacationing in Vermont. I'm not an expert on Vermont, but I just think we should keep our eye on the ball here, right? The question was, should the Supreme Court of the United States overturn what the Congress and the President had enacted in attempting to extend to a large number of people who are not covered health care insurance? And the real quid pro quo for doing that was to say to people who can afford it, again, this only applies to people who can afford to buy health care insurance. Look, you got to buy into the system or pay a tax, because if you don't buy into the system, then you're part of the problem. You're a free rider, and everybody has to be responsible to act together to ensure that we can provide as broad health care insurance as is possible. And the question was whether Congress has the authority to do that. And I think we should be celebrating the fact that the Supreme Court upheld that power. That doesn't mean that this is the best law that could ever have been enacted. Doesn't mean we still shouldn't be pressing for better health care insurance for all. But this is far better than the alternative. The alternative would have been denying health care insurance to the many, many millions of people that this law extended it to, and going back to where we were before this massive effort to try to expand health care insurance was undertaken.
David, we have Minneapolis Congressmember Keith Ellison back in Washington, D.C., part of the Progressive Caucus, co-head of the Progressive Caucus. Congressmember Ellison, what about the issue of a public option of a single-payer health care, what the Progressive Caucus plans to do, even as you support the upholding of the Affordable Care Act?
Well, America needs it. It's what's needed. It is the next logical step. It's what we all have to fight for and agitate for. Now that we know that the Congress has the authority to regulate in this area, why should we stop now? I think we need a public option. We need Medicare for all, and this is going to be a key feature of what we will continue to stand for. We also need to understand that this should put wind in ourselves. We should be more invigorated. If there's anything to worry about now, the big worry is to make sure that insurance companies don't try to gouge with their premiums. But the other worry is to make sure that the progressive movement doesn't think, okay, we won that one. No, well, we saw the law upheld, which is good, but now it's time to organize in the grassroots much more so. I'd like to see some amendments that would allow states to pursue a single-payer system, public option system, that would allow states to conglomerate and not just have exchanges in their own state, but actually on a wider basis, and really have some real accountability at these insurance companies, which is something that is sorely needed and has been for generations. So I think there's a lot more work to be done, and now we should get at it, knowing that at least this round, this step forward was protected.
Elizabeth Benjamin of Community Service Society.
I was just going to say to the congressman's point about we need to work to prevent insurance companies from gouging us. That there is a law in the Affordable Care Act that does go to that end. Basically, the Affordable Care Act says insurance companies must spend at least 15% of every premium dollar, so 85% of every premium dollar on health care costs. Only 15%, which is still too much in my opinion, can be spent on administration, profits, and a bunch of other stuff. But right now, there are many, many insurance products out there where the insurance companies are only spending 75 cents or 60 cents of every dollar on health care costs. So this is a huge step. It's a beginning of a longer conversation about the role of insurance carriers, of course, but there is a lot of sort of aggressive regulation that's built in to protect us, and consumer protections that are built in to protect us who have health insurance in the law. And it's an exciting day because those provisions have been upheld.
Congressmember Ellison.
Let me agree that is absolutely right, but we've got to make sure these provisions are fully utilized and enforced. In fact, there's an additional provision which allows for states to be able to actually take legal action if they feel that they're being gouged and having premiums rising at an extraordinary rate, beyond any sort of rationality. And so there are a few ways to try to hold insurance companies more and more accountable. So the big effort now will be to fully implement the law. There's a number of states that have been resisting the implementation of the exchanges. I think, right now, HHS has to make sure that every state has one, that it's functioning as people intended, and that we really let the Affordable Care Act soak in so that it becomes just like Medicare is. That people see it the way they see Medicare, they see it the way they see Social Security. Well, nobody ever said we couldn't improve Medicare and Social Security, and we will, and we have. We got to improve this, too.
Congressmember Keith Ellison, I want to thank you for being with us, a member of the Progressive Caucus, and Elizabeth Benjamin as well of the Community Service Society, as we turn now to Michael Moore in Los Angeles. Michael Moore, the Academy Award-winning filmmaker who made, among many of his films, the 2007 documentary Sicko, which examined the American healthcare system. Michael, your response to the Supreme Court, led by Chief Justice Roberts, upholding the Affordable Care Act.
I think, let me state the positive first. This really is a huge victory for our side. In spite of all of my concerns with this law, it didn't go far enough. It doesn't cover all Americans. This is not true universal health care. Nonetheless, the right wing has been handed a serious defeat today. This is a real smackdown of their the way that they believe our country should be structured. And on that alone, everybody should feel really good right now. I know we're not used to euphoria over anything. It rarely happens, but in this case, I think that everybody should pause today and celebrate this victory. And then tomorrow, we have to keep moving the ball down the field. We have to work toward Medicare for all so that everyone's covered, a single-payer system, all these things. It would have been a lot harder to move that ball had the decision gone the other way today. That's why the best thing about this is that it moves history forward on the right path toward what we will eventually have, just as every other civilized country has it. So I'm on that level. I feel really good, and tomorrow, or maybe even later today, we'll start talking about how this law is also structured to create huge profits for insurance companies, and in the end, we can't allow private insurance, people making a profit off of people getting sick. Private insurance is not the way to go, and that's what we have to keep moving toward.
I wanted to remind people about the documentary you did, which goes very much to the point you just made, Michael Moore. This is the trailer of Sicko.
We got an issue in America. Too many good docs are getting out of business. Too many OBGYNs aren't able to practice their love with women all across this country.
When Michael Moore decided to make a movie on the healthcare industry, top-level executives were on the defensive. What were they hiding?
That's not on, right?
No.
Okay.
The intent is to maximize profits.
If you denied more people health care, you got a bonus.
When you don't spend money on somebody, it's a savings to the company.
I want America to have the finest health care in the world.
4 healthcare lobbyists for every member of Congress. Here's what it costs to buy these men, and this woman, this guy, and this guy. And the United States slipped to 37 in healthcare around the world, just slightly ahead of Slovenia.
I denied a man a necessary operation and thus caused his death. This secured my reputation, and it ensured my continued advancement in the healthcare field.
In the world's richest country.
I work 3 jobs.
You work 3 jobs?
Yes.
Uniquely American, isn't it? I mean, that is fantastic.
Laughter isn't the best medicine.
I get a bill from my insurance company telling me that the ambulance ride wasn't pre-approved. I don't know when I was supposed to pre-approve it. After I gained consciousness in the car, before I got in the ambulance.
It's the only medicine.
There was actually one place on American soil that had free universal health care.
Which way to Guantanamo Bay?
Detainees representing a threat to our national security are given access to top-notch medical facilities.
Permission to enter. I have 3 9/11 rescue workers.
They just want some medical attention, the same kind that the evildoers are getting.
There you have it, Michael Moore, the Academy Award-winning filmmaker. It's the 5th anniversary of his documentary, Sicko. He's on the Democracy Now! Video stream with us from Los Angeles, responding to the Supreme Court upholding the Affordable Care Act. And those that sided with Chief Justice, who was the swing vote in the decision, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Stephen Breyer, Sonia Sotomayor, and Elena Kagan. Michael, we've spoken to a lot of single-payer advocates who say it's not a surprise Roberts sided with them, because this is siding with the insurance industry, certainly an industry that you have taken on and that has targeted you. So your thoughts when you say tomorrow we begin the fight for Medicare for all, on what direction that should go?
Toward exactly what you just said, Medicare for all. We just need to expand Medicare for all the citizens of this country. Now, of course, this is something that the insurance companies don't want to happen, because ultimately Medicare for all won't work if the people aren't in charge of it. Right now, and continuing even with this victory today, the insurance companies are going to call the shots. They're going to be restricted more than they were in the past. For instance, one of the great things about today is that the provision that they cannot deny people because of pre-existing conditions, that apparently now stands. The fact that parents can keep their children up to the age of 26 on their health insurance, that stands. So there's all these smaller provisions that are in that, you know, they keep talking about the mandate being the centerpiece of this law. Well, there's other pieces of the law that are I think, just as important, if not more important. And the mandate is, I mean, it's, I've never supported it because it mandates people to give money to these profit-making insurance companies. If it was different, if it was something that the government ran, that you and I were in charge of, then yes, everybody has to be part of this system. And we're all in this together. We all have to share the burden. We all have to take care of each other. So, so that's the fight that needs to continue. The National Nurses Union is going to lead the way on this. We should get behind their efforts. And I am very optimistic. I know we have a hard road ahead of us, but if you just take the long view of this, every step of the way goes in our direction, not the backwards direction. So. Well,
Michael Moore, I want to thank you so much for being with us. Michael Moore, who is the Academy Award-winning filmmaker who did Sicko and many other films. Democracy Now! Produced by Mike Burke, Renee Feltz, Armando Nermin, Sheikh, Steve Martinez. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks so much for joining us.